The Banyamurenge are not immigrants to Zaire. They're not. The kingdom of Rwanda was partitioned between the Germans and the Belgians. And the Belgians took a part of the kingdom of Rwanda, the traditional kingdom of Rwanda, with the people. So when we say respect that border, which was agreed between the Germans and the Belgians, we must also be saying respect the people whom you received under that partition. You can't turn around and say, we no longer want you. You are no longer citizens of our country. What are you going to do? Are you going to return them alone, or you return them with the piece of land? This is the position in Rwanda and Burundi. We talk about them as if we have 3 different tribes in Rwanda and Burundi. Or now actually some of those who outside Africa, we don't even think of 2 tribes, 3, we think of 2. So we think there is a Tutsi tribe there and a Hutu tribe. They aren't. In Burundi, you simply have 1 tribe, the Barundi. In Rwanda, you have 1 tribe, the Banyarwanda. Actually, they would tell you now, or in the past at least, they would tell you that they're not even tribes, they're nations, they're a nation. Rwanda is 1 nation, and that nation is the nation of the Banyarwanda. And in Burundi, you have 1 nation, the nation of the Barundi. Political problems in Zaire did not start with the Banyamulenge. When did we hear about the Banyamulenge? I think 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Then I heard that the spokesman of the Banyamulenge is somebody called Kabila. But Kabila has been fighting the government of Zaire for the last 30 years. So there is the problem of the Banyamulenge, yes, but there is a purely political problem of Zaire, which will still remain when the problem of the Banyamulenge is over. When the refugees have gone back, when the problem of the refugees can go back. When the refugees have all returned to Rwanda, there is still going to be a problem of Zaire, partly that of the Banyamulenge, but partly a major problem in the country. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this welcome. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your words and for asking me to make a short introduction to the discussion before us. I make the promise to be brief, but this is not the first time I make that kind of introduction, that promise that I'm going to be brief. And then what happens is that when I begin going, I go on and on and on. So, Mr. Chairman, if you find that I'm going on and on and on, forget the respect, say Mwalimu, stop. To some of you, I've spoken, or you have heard me speak on the problems of the Great Lakes. So if what I'm going to say is going to be a repetition, to sound a repetition to some, at least to some of you, nevertheless I'm going to go over some of those things because it's easier for me to explain to you a little background to the problems that we are now facing in the Great Lakes. First, Burundi. Let me take Burundi and Rwanda together. First, Rwanda and Burundi have in common, apart from the current problems now, have in common the ethnic groupings. Rwanda, as we all must have heard, have people whom they call Hutu, people they call Tutsi, and others we don't hear about called Batwa. Batwa. Hutu, Tutsis, and Batwa. Each one of those countries, both Rwanda and Burundi, have the same type of ethnic groups. Both have Hutus, have Tutsis, have Batwa. My tribe has 2, not 3. My tribe has the bigger group called the Bairu. You may know that, you may not know that, but Museveni knows it. My tribe has 2 groups called the Bairu, the first group, the major group, and the second group called the Baturi. Bairu and Baturi. And I say my tribe because these are groups in the same tribe, of the same tribe. In Rwanda and Burundi, you have 3. The large group, the Hutu, who are the peasants. Traditionally, they were the peasants. You have the next large group in both countries around about the same percentage, about 85% Hutu and 15% or 16% Tutsi. Traditionally, the cattle people. And you have a much smaller group, the Batwa, the artisans. So, in occupation, these people were divided. Those who were engaged in farming, those who were engaged in rearing cattle and goats, and the artisans who made the knives and the forks and the not forks, they never made forks, the spears and the axes and the hoes. 3. In my tribe, we have only 2. The Bairu and the Baturi. The Baturi in my tribe are the artisans, the makers of spears and knives and axes and hoes. And the Bairu, mainly now we say the peasants. But what has happened in my tribe, that the peasants, the farmers, the tillers of the land, and the cattle people have merged. So we don't have 3, we have only 2. The cattle people and the tillers of the land have merged. So now we have only 2. But we are one tribe, we are not 2 tribes. We're a single tribe, and I'm emphasizing this for that purpose. I've taken this trouble for that purpose. We're a single tribe, the Zanaki tribe. We're not 2 tribes, the Bairu tribe and the Baturi tribe. We're a single tribe, the Wazanaki. But in terms of occupation, traditionally, some were, the majority were tillers of the land, and a minority were artisans. This is the position in Rwanda and Burundi. We talk about them as if we have 3 different tribes in Rwanda and Burundi. Or now actually some of those who, outside Africa, we don't even think of 2 tribes, we think 3, we think of 2. So we think there is a Tutsi tribe there and a Hutu tribe. They aren't. In Burundi, you simply have one tribe, the Barundi. In Rwanda, you have one tribe, the Banyarwanda. Actually, they would tell you now, or in the past at least, they would tell you that they're not even tribes, they're nations, they're a nation. Rwanda is one nation, and that nation is the nation of the Banyarwanda. And in Burundi, you have one nation, the nation of the Barundi. I remember in the case of Burundi, where I worked together with Prince Rwagasore when he was founding the liberation movement of his own country, UPRONA. I remember when we worked together, how much I used to say to him that I envied him. Because whereas Burundi was a nation and a single administration before it was taken over by the Germans, a country that had had centuries, several centuries, administered by a monarchy. And therefore, I said to him, whereas your country is going to come out of colonialism as a nation, Tanganyika, which I was leading, was not going to come out of colonialism as a nation. It was going to come out of colonialism as a collection of tribes. And we had 126 of them, mine being one of the smallest. So Rwanda and Burundi, and Rwanda is also true. It's a country of quite a long history, a kingdom which had been there for several centuries before the partition of Africa at the end of the 19th century. I wanted to emphasize that point of the ethnicity of Rwanda and Burundi. These people are the same people. A tribe, my little tribe in Tanzania, has the characteristics of a tribe. And a tribe has a language. So my tribe has a language. He comes from another tribe in Tanzania. They have a different language from mine. He comes from another tribe in Tanzania. They have their language, the language of their tribe. He comes from another tribe in Tanzania. So a tribe has its characteristics. It has a language, it has a land. So my tribe has its own language, Kizanaki, and it has a land, a piece of land, the land of the Bazanaki, called Zanaki. We have our own gods. Our gods are not your gods. And they are not their gods. And we have our own culture. Our culture is different. This is not true in Rwanda or in Burundi. The Wahutu don't have a language called Kihutu. They don't have a piece of land called Hutu land. The Batwa don't have a land of their own. These are the same people, the same language, the same land, the same culture, the same gods. So traditionally they had the same gods, and of course today they also have the same God because most of them are Christians. I want to go back a little bit to my tribe. We live peacefully together as a single tribe. Traditionally, two separate occupations. We belong to Tanzania, a much bigger country. Our little tribe was not left alone. But our piece of land is small, fertile, but small. But we belong to a wide area, Tanzania. When we feel crowded, we move on. We move to other parts of Tanzania. We don't remain on that little piece of land called Zanaki. He comes from another piece of country in Tanzania called the Kilimanjaro. Some of you have heard the Kilimanjaro. Very fertile, packed with people. Dynamic. He comes from one of the most dynamic tribes of the country. If we had left them on their own and they were not part of Tanzania, packed as they are, dynamic as they are, and they did not have a place to flow to when they're overpacked on that little fertile little land, I think we would have discovered that perhaps they are not one people called the Wachaga. We would discover that they have their own divisions there, and we would think those divisions are tribes, when in actual fact they're not tribes. The point I'm making is the problems, the major problem of Rwanda and Burundi is not tribal. It's economic. It's land. These little countries are packed up with people. They're very fertile, packed up with people. And they have no space. And if you are squeezed for space, you look for the squeezer. Who is squeezing me? And you define the squeezer. And we define the squeezer in terms of tribe. So you invent a tribe. So the Hutu become a tribe, the Tutsi become a tribe, the Batwa become a tribe. And unfortunately, in the case both Rwanda and Burundi, unfortunately, the ethnicity was played up, exploited, used by both the Germans and the Belgians. The cattle people produced also the ruling class, the ruling families. And the Germans decided to use the ruling families, the ruling class, for their administration of both Rwanda and Burundi. And they began treating them more differently from the Tutsis. They gave them a better education, they gave them a better chance economically. The Belgians came and they did the same. By the time they left, this traditional division between Tutsis and Hutus, which was not very big, had become very big. The Germans and the Belgians had decided that the Tutsis were superior to the Tutsi, to the Hutu. Those were the years of the superiority of races in the world. And so the Tutsis were regarded as superior to the Hutus, and this idea of superiority was built and built and built. And they were given a better education, they were the rulers, they were given better chance in economics and so in the economy of the country and so forth. By the time the Germans and the Belgians left, the divisions were very big. And power in a poor country like that, power also became an instrument of sharing the little wealth that was there. And this is the major problem in both Rwanda and Burundi. I think now I should stop with Rwanda and Burundi. No, I'll stop there. Now, Rwanda, at independence, the Belgians, before they left, they assisted the Hutus to abolish the monarchy, and there is what they called their revolution. They worked at a revolution of 1959. The monarchy was abolished in Rwanda, and the Tutsis were suppressed, the traditional rulers of the country. And a large number of refugees left the country, Tutsi refugees. Most of them went to Uganda. So in Rwanda, at independence, the majority, with the assistance of the Belgian colonial power, the majority took over power, suppressed the minority, and the minority, a large number of that minority Tutsi went into exile. Most of them went to Uganda. So in Rwanda, the majority was in power, the minority was the suppressed, the excluded, the word used there is the excluded one was the Tutsi minority, and the refugees from there, from Rwanda, were the Tutsis, and they were mostly in Uganda. We had some of them. In Burundi, it was the other way around. There, the monarchy was abolished, but it was abolished not by the Belgians. It was abolished by another clan of the Tutsis. And the Tutsis, the Tutsi minority, took over. The first military ruler who abolished the monarchy, somebody called Major Michombero. He in turn was later overthrown by his cousin Bagaza, who is still around, and Bagaza in turn was overthrown by his cousin Buyoya, who is still around, who is very much around. And these cousins come from virtually from the same village, a place called Bururi. So in Burundi, power was in the hands of the minority Tutsi, supported by the army. The excluded were the majority Tutsis, Hutus, and the refugees from Burundi were the Hutus. They went mostly to Tanzania. So our refugees, most of our refugees, whereas most of Uganda's refugees were the Tutsis from Rwanda, most of our refugees were the Hutus from Burundi. When the United High Commission for Refugees gave me that medal for the good work we were doing in treating refugees, some of those refugees were my friends, the Batutsi, the Bahutu from Burundi. Of course, I had some from South Africa also, and Mozambique, and part of Southern Africa. And Burundi then was a little apartheid state. When I was working very hard in fighting against apartheid in South Africa, some of my Western friends used to embarrass me very much. They used to say, Mwalimu Nyerere, yes, we understand your fervor, your passion in fighting against apartheid in South Africa. What about the apartheid in Burundi? And I used to remain slightly embarrassed without getting very much of an answer. There was very little we could do because, well, what could I do? Under the OAU Charter, what was happening in Burundi then, or Rwanda, and this was true until this year. What was happening in Burundi and Rwanda, according to the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, was an internal affair of Rwanda and Burundi. And we were forbidden by the Charter to interfere. Non-interference was a piece of religion. Non-interference in the internal affairs of another member of the Organization of African. That was the fact, but it was extremely embarrassing. Things are changing. Many of you know now that when my friend Buyoya, after the chaotic situation that resulted from the assassination of President Ndadaye, Buyoya, I must say that, some of you may not know it. President Buyoya took over from Bagaza in 1987 through a military coup. But then he introduced multi-party elections. And in 1993, multi-party elections were held in Burundi. His party lost. And another party, the opposition party, won. And Buyoya did the decent thing. He stepped down. He accepted the results of the elections and stepped down. And his successor, a man called Ndadaye, also did the right thing. The democracy we have learned from, especially from my friend the British, but also the French and the Americans, I think, but especially the British. I know that a little bit more because whatever we learned from them, not from the French or the Americans. In Britain, the Conservative Party has now been in power for nearly 17 years. Nearly 17 years. They win under their system. They win the election. They get about 43% of the voters vote for them. 43%, not more than that, vote for them. Under their system, that 43% gives them the majority of the seats in parliament. So they get 43%, which is a minority of the electorate, because 57% have said no. 43% gives them a majority of members in the House of Commons. And that majority gives them 100% of the power. And the British are very decent people. And so the Labour Party has been waiting there for 17 years. 17 years as the loyal opposition. Her Majesty's loyal opposition. For 17 years. Fine. I mean, that is their system. They like the system. They've accepted it. It works. A minority of the voters, a majority of the members of parliament, 100% of the power. President Ndadaye did not do that, which I thought was very decent of him. Buyoya accepted the defeat, stepped down. Ndadaye took over. He had 160%, more than 60% of about 80%, I think, of the members of parliament. But in forming his cabinet, he gave 40% of the portfolios to the opposition, to the party that had lost the election. And we thought this was wonderful. This is really how Africans should now try to use this European system or multi-party system. Because I can't see that Africans are going to be so patient that they're going to sit there as being a loyal opposition of something and wait for their turn. This is very good. We thought that was very good. We all, actually in East Africa, all of us were very, very pleased by Buyoya, very pleased by Ndadaye. Unfortunately, the army had better ideas. And within months, the army assassinated the president. Chaos began. Many of you know how that chaos went on, and there was a chaotic situation. And eventually, my friend Buyoya is back, back in power. I want to end up that part by telling you the change that has taken place in Africa. If this had taken place, actually, I believe 12 months ago, perhaps I would not be here talking to you the way I'm talking to you now. 1994, in Rwanda, that genocide took place. 1 million people were killed. It's not only the international community outside Africa which sat and did nothing. Africa itself sat and did nothing. We in Tanzania were there. We had helped the Rwandese to negotiate an agreement, a power sharing agreement in a place called Arusha in my country. We knew what was going on. When the Hutu majority, with the extremists among the Hutus, rejected that agreement, the Arusha Accords, and the killings began. The world outside Africa sat, did nothing. But the good thing they did was to put on the screens, the television screens, what was going on. But Africa also sat and did nothing. I went to Tunis that year, June that year, because Mandela was going to take his seat for the first time, representing post-apartheid South Africa. And I had begged the Secretary General, please, please, please invite me. I want to be there. And he had invited me. And I was there because I wanted to see Mandela take that seat. So I went. And it was a tremendous thing. We received Mandela. It was a great occasion for Africa to receive Mandela. But it was also a shameful moment for Africa. We received the killers from Rwanda. They came, they took part. We received them together with Mandela. That was Africa. Why? Because what could we do? Non-interference in the internal affairs of Rwanda. I think Africa is changing. So my friend Buyoya took over, went back. What de Klerk might have done, de Klerk going back and taking over power again. So my friend Buyoya went back on the 25th of July this year. We had all condemned that coup before it took place. The coup took place on the 25th of July. The East African leaders met on the 31st of the same month and applied sanctions against the coup. And I want to emphasize the importance to your excellencies and friends, the importance of that change in Africa. A group of African leaders meeting and saying to the leader of a coup in a neighboring country, we will not take it. We can't have military rule on our borders. Now, usually news from Africa is always bad news. Do you think that is bad news? That is very good news. And that is why these leaders expect that they'll get full support from the international community. My leaders met also in Nairobi on the 5th of this month to discuss Zaire. Of last month, to discuss Zaire. It was that meeting which asked the international community to establish a neutral military force to go into eastern Zaire to help aid agencies, to help the refugees, to reach the Rwanda refugees wherever they are and help them, but also to establish safe corridors and what the communique called temporary safe havens for the purpose of receiving refugees and help them to go back to Rwanda. My leaders believed that the most important job for the international community, for the multinational force, would be to help the refugees of Rwanda to go back. Because as long as they are in Zaire, there is a potential security problem between the two countries. So it's better to end that problem by helping the refugees to go back. But we knew what was happening. With the genuine refugees, you had the Interahamwe, the militia that had participated in the genocide, and the former army of the Rwanda government. They did not want the refugees to go back. They wanted them in Zaire. They prevented them from going to Zaire. So my leaders say, fine, we don't want the refugees to return voluntarily. We don't want refugees to be forced to go back to Rwanda. Some may not want to go back to Rwanda. So they should not be forced to go back. But they must not be forced not to go back. And we cannot know whether they are making a free decision either to go or not to go until we separate them from the intimidators. So the multinational force should help the return of the refugees by helping to separate the intimidators from the genuine refugees. We are still debating that, I think. We can discuss that a little bit later. But I want to point out, Your Excellencies, also the one important element in the communique of my leaders of Nairobi of the 5th of November. Our leaders, I refer to the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, non-interference in the internal affairs of another state. Why? Because there were the accusation, there were accusations that it's just possible Zaire was using the presence of the Rwandese refugees to destabilize Rwanda. And Rwanda was responding by destabilizing Zaire in turn. And this, according to the charter, was wrong. So our leaders in that communique reminded themselves and the others concerned of that charter, the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, non-interference in the internal affairs of another state. But they reminded themselves also of another. The OAU, apart from the charter, has a resolution which I helped to move in Cairo in 1964. The borders of Africa are very artificial. Most African states are not natural entities. Like Tanganyika, they're a collection of tribes, and the borders don't make sense. Some of the borders are a straight line. Our former rulers took a straight line and argued where, say put it there, but move it back there, and they moved. Those are the kind of borders we have. And they cut tribes in between. So in Tanzania, for instance, 60% of the Maasai, you have heard of the Maasai, 60% of the Maasai are in Tanzania, 40% are in Kenya. Our southern border, the majority of the Makonde are in Mozambique. But we have a large part of the Makonde in Tanzania. At present, we have on the border with Rwanda, we have 600,000 refugees or 650,000 refugees from Rwanda. But actually, they're among their own people. They've just crossed that invisible border there, and they are living with their own people on the other side of the border. And some of us felt, and I felt particularly, that those borders, although they're stupid, we must keep them. We must not try and play about with them and say disentangle them. Disentangling those borders would be a mess. Africa could just go into flame if we try. So I moved that resolution in Cairo, 1964. Please respect the borders which we inherit from colonialism. And that provision has been accepted ever since, questioned by very few. But although we have respected that declaration, and we have also respected the charter, non-interference, we have actually ignored the fact that it's no use respecting the borders without respecting the people who are within those borders. We have paid scant respect to what happens to our own people within the countries in those borders. So sometimes we expel them, and recently in Zaire, now I'm going to talk to about Zaire. Zaire, I'm told, passed some law which said the so-called Banyamurenge are not Zaire citizens anymore. This was a change. That first, at independence, they were regarded as, citizens. And then later, a new law was passed which denationalized them. The Banyamurenge are not immigrants to Zaire. They're not. The kingdom of Rwanda was partitioned between the Germans and the Belgians. And the Belgians took a part of the kingdom of Rwanda, the traditional kingdom of Rwanda, with the people. So when we say respect that border, which was agreed between the Germans and the Belgians, we must also be saying respect the people whom you received under that partition. You can't turn around and say, we no longer want you. You are no longer citizens of our country. What are you going to do? Are you going to return them alone, or you return them with the piece of land? You can't say go home. Home where? We couldn't in Tanzania get fed up with the Maasai and say the Maasai go home to Kenya. Kenya is not their home. These are Maasai of Tanzania. And my friend Moi can't, for some reason or other, get fed up with the Maasai of Kenya and say go back to Tanzania. That it's not back to Tanzania. They've never been in Tanzania. They've always been there. Their country was partitioned between the British and the Germans. And part of them went to Dosho, East Africa, and part of them went to British East Africa. They are Kenyans. They're not Tanzanians. And our Maasai are Tanzanians. They're not Kenyans. If we want them to live under the same flag, Kenya and Tanzania should federate. The only way we can put the Maasai under the same flag. So that's a problem in Zaire, this problem of the Banyamurenge. But finally, the political problems in Zaire did not start with the Banyamurenge. When did we hear about the Banyamurenge? I think 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Then I heard that the spokesman of the Banyamurenge is somebody called Kabila. But Kabila has been fighting the government of Zaire for the last 30 years. So there is the problem of the Banyamurenge, yes, but there is a purely political problem of Zaire, which will still remain when the problem of the Banyamurenge is over. When the refugees have gone back, when the problem of the refugees can go back. When the refugees have all returned to Rwanda, there is still going to be a problem of Zaire, partly that of the Banyamurenge, but partly a major problem in the country. You are too polite to say stop. Your Excellencies, thank you very much.